My name is Ava Bennett. I'm 25 years old, and 3 days before my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, I discovered that the house I'd bought for them had been turned into a business. Not by strangers, not by scammers, by my husband's family. The worst part? My parents were already living there, just not in the part of the house that belonged to them. For 7 years, I saved for one dream, a seaside home. Not for me, for my parents. My father, Daniel, spent most of his life repairing fishing boats along the Oregon coast. My mother, Grace, cleaned vacation rentals and hotels. They worked harder than anyone I knew, and somehow always had less than everyone else. When I was 11, my mother once stood on a beach overlook and quietly said, "Imagine waking up to the ocean every morning." She probably forgot saying it. I never did. That sentence stayed with me for 14 years. So after college, I worked every overtime shift I could get. I skipped vacations. I drove an old car that rattled every time it started. And little by little, I built a savings account. 3 months before their anniversary, I finally found it. A beautiful white house overlooking the Pacific. Big porch, large kitchen, ocean view from almost every room. The moment I saw it, I knew. This was their home. I bought it immediately. The deed was in my name alone. The plan was simple. On their 50th anniversary, I would hand them the keys and tell them the house belonged to them forever. Only 4 people knew about the surprise: me, my husband Cole, his mother Vivian, and his brother Mason. Cole convinced me his family could help prepare the property while I handled work in Portland, clean the house, arrange decorations, get everything ready. At the time, it sounded helpful. Looking back, it was the moment everything started going wrong. About a month before the anniversary, strange things began happening. The utility bills were much higher than expected. Water usage doubled. Electricity nearly tripled. Garbage service showed multiple weekly pickups. I asked Cole about it. He laughed. Big house, old wiring, nothing unusual. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Then my mother called one evening. She sounded hesitant. "Sweetheart, Cole's family seems to be spending a lot of time at the coast house." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing bad," she said quickly. "They're just there almost every weekend." Almost every weekend. That bothered me. But every time I asked questions, someone had an answer ready. Preparing the property, fixing landscaping, painting, decorating. Always something. Eventually, I convinced myself I was overthinking. 3 days before the anniversary, I decided to drive down and see the finished house for myself. I wanted one quiet moment inside before giving it to my parents. I wanted to picture my mother's face. I wanted to stand on that porch and imagine her finally getting the life she'd dreamed about. The drive took almost 3 hours. The closer I got to Harbor Cove, the more excited I became. I kept touching the silver key in my pocket. I even practiced what I was going to say. "Happy anniversary. It's yours. You never have to leave." I must have repeated it 20 times. Then I turned onto the final road, and everything changed. Cars, dozens of them. The entire gravel lot was packed. Luxury SUVs, rental vans, catering trucks, a florist trailer. For a moment, I thought I had taken a wrong turn. Then I saw the house. My house. And directly beside the entrance stood a massive wooden sign. Harbor View Weddings, exclusive coastal venue. I hit the brakes so hard, gravel sprayed behind me. My heart started pounding. Wedding venue? What wedding venue? I pulled into the driveway and got out. People were everywhere. Workers carrying chairs, staff hanging decorations, boxes of champagne, white tents covering the lawn, music equipment stacked near the porch. Nobody looked confused. Nobody looked surprised. They acted like they had been doing this for a long time. Then I saw my parents, and suddenly none of the rest mattered. They were sitting behind the house, near the maintenance shed. 2 folding chairs, a small plastic table, my father staring at the ground, my mother looking exhausted. Neither of them belonged back there. I hurried toward them. The second my mother saw me, tears filled her eyes. "Ava," I crouched beside her. "Mom, what's going on?" She glanced nervously toward the house. Then she whispered 6 words that made my stomach drop. "They told us to stay hidden." I looked toward the porch, and that's when I saw my mother-in-law Vivian standing there with a glass of champagne in her hand, acting like she owned everything, the house, the property, even my parents. And in that moment, I realized something terrible. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. My husband's family had turned my parents' dream home into a business. And whatever was happening here had been happening for a while. I sat beside my parents behind the cottage and tried to understand what I was looking at. The house was full of strangers. Wedding staff moved across the lawn, music equipment covered the porch, and somehow my parents were sitting behind a storage building like they weren't supposed to be seen. "Start from the beginning," I said. My father sighed. "We got here about 3 weeks ago." I frowned. "What do you mean?" My mother looked confused. "Cole told us you wanted us moved in early." My stomach dropped. I had never said that, not once. The anniversary surprise was supposed to happen in 3 days. Someone had lied to them, and they trusted the person who told the lie. My father rubbed his hands together. "He said you were busy and wanted us settled before the party." I looked toward the house. Already I knew where this was going. "What happened after you arrived?" My mother hesitated. "At first, they put us in the cottage, a tiny building behind the house meant for storage and gardening tools, not for 2 retired people. They said it would only be temporary," she continued. "There were wedding preparations happening." I looked back at the crowded lawn. Wedding preparations. Clearly that wasn't a one-time event. "How many weddings?" my father answered quietly. "Several." That was enough. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a business, a real business, and it had been operating for weeks, maybe months. I stood up. "Where's Cole?" My mother pointed toward the house. I walked straight across the lawn. The closer I got, the worse things looked. White chairs faced the ocean. Event banners stood near the entrance. Workers carried decorations through the front door. Then I saw a large wooden sign, "Harbor View Weddings, exclusive coastal venue." I stopped. My house, my property, my parents' future home, being advertised like a commercial event space. When I stepped inside, things got worse. The living room had become a reception area. Brochures sat on tables. A booking calendar hung on the wall. The entire house looked like a business, not a home. Then I heard Cole's voice. "Ava?" I turned. The look on his face told me everything. He hadn't expected me to show up. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he forced a smile. "You're early." I stared at him. "What is this?" His smile disappeared. "Ava, let me explain." "No." I pointed toward the reception desk. "What is this?" He looked exhausted. "It's temporary." I almost laughed. That word again. Temporary. The same word they'd used on my parents. The same word everyone uses when they expect someone else to carry the cost. "Who gave you permission?" Cole looked away, and that was answer enough. Nobody had permission, because nobody ever asked. Then he said something that changed everything. My family needed the income. Not an apology, not an explanation, an excuse. Income. That was what my parents' dream had become. Income. I looked at him for several seconds, then asked the question that mattered most. Where is the money going? The moment those words left my mouth, Cole's face changed, and I knew instantly, whatever was happening inside this house was much bigger than a few weddings. Cole didn't answer my question immediately. He just stood there looking at the floor. That silence told me more than words could. "Where is the money going?" I asked again. Finally, he sighed. "My parents are in debt." I stared at him. "How much debt?" He hesitated, then quietly said, "More than $80,000. For a moment, I couldn't speak. $80,000. Suddenly, everything started making sense. The weddings, the guests, the constant activity, the excuses. This wasn't a hobby. It wasn't a family project. It was a desperate attempt to generate cash. "But that doesn't explain this," I said, pointing around the house. Cole rubbed his face. "My mom thought she could build a wedding business." I looked around the room. The banners, the decorations, the reception area, the booking calendar. So that was it. Vivian had found a beautiful oceanfront property and decided to turn it into her dream business. The only problem? It wasn't hers. "How many weddings have happened here?" Cole looked uncomfortable. 9. 9. My stomach turned. 9 weekends. 9 groups of strangers. 9 times my parents' home had been sold to someone else. I walked toward the reception desk and noticed a booking binder sitting beside it. The second I reached for it, Cole stepped forward. "Ava, don't." That was all the encouragement I needed. I opened it. Inside were booking records, invoices, and payment summaries. Thousands of dollars had moved through the property, far more than I expected. Then I noticed something strange. The payments weren't going to Vivian. They weren't even going to Cole. They were being deposited into Mason's account, Cole's brother. I looked up. "Why?" He looked trapped, then finally answered, "Because creditors can't touch it there." The room went silent. Now I understood. The money wasn't just earning income, it was being hidden. The deeper I looked, the worse things became. Near the back of the binder was a folder labeled Property Expansion Plan. I opened it. Inside were drawings for future event spaces, larger wedding setups, additional guest areas, and long-term business plans. My heart sank. They weren't planning to leave after wedding season. They were planning to stay, maybe permanently. Then I found something even worse. A printed email from Mason to Vivian. One sentence jumped off the page. "If we can keep Ava away until fall, she'll be too invested emotionally to shut it down." I read it twice, then a third time. They knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't temporary. It wasn't help. It was a plan, a deliberate one, and my husband had known about it from the beginning. Then my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Attached was a screenshot from a staff group chat. I opened it. The message was from Vivian. "Please keep Daniel and Grace behind the cottage during events. Guests are paying for an upscale experience." Below it, Mason had replied, "Just tell people they're caretakers." Caretakers. Not homeowners. Not family. Caretakers. I stared at the screen, and for the first time since arriving in Harbor Cove, my anger disappeared completely, because this wasn't about the house anymore. This was about my parents, and what had been done to them. The next morning I called a lawyer. Vivian froze the second she saw the binder in my hands. For the first time that day, she wasn't smiling. For the first time, she looked worried. "Ava," she said carefully, "that's business paperwork." I looked down at the binder, then back at her. "No," I closed it slowly. "That's my paperwork." The room went silent. Cole looked trapped. Vivian looked angry. And I suddenly realized something important. Neither of them were acting like people who had made an innocent mistake. They were acting like people who were afraid of being exposed. Vivian walked toward me. "Give me the binder." I didn't move. "Why?" "Because it doesn't concern you." I almost laughed. The wedding venue was operating inside my house. The guests were sleeping in my house. The bookings were being taken for my house. And somehow it didn't concern me. I tucked the binder under my arm. I'm taking this. Vivian's face hardened. You have no idea how much work we've put into this. There it was. Not gratitude, not apology, ownership. In her mind, the work she'd done mattered more than the fact that she never had permission to do it. I walked past her. Neither she nor Cole tried to stop me, because they knew stopping me would only make things worse. I drove straight back to the motel. My parents were sitting outside overlooking the water when I arrived. My mother looked up immediately. Everything okay? I forced a smile. It will be. That night, after they went to sleep, I opened the binder again, and this time I read every page. 2 hours later, I understood exactly why Vivian had panicked. The wedding business wasn't successful. Not really. It was drowning. Most of the money coming in wasn't staying. Huge portions disappeared almost immediately. Vendor payments, loan payments, credit card balances, past due notices, late fees, interest charges. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. Then I found a folder clipped into the back. Property expansion plan. My stomach tightened. I opened it. Inside were sketches, construction plans, parking layouts, future event spaces, a larger reception hall, additional guest cottages, permanent wedding facilities. I stared at the papers. They weren't planning to leave. Not next month, not next year, maybe not ever. They weren't treating my parents' home like temporary space. They were treating it like the future headquarters of their business. Then I found something even worse. A printed email. The sender was Mason. The recipient was Vivian. The subject line read, "Keep Ava away until fall." I read it twice, then 3 times. The message was short. If we can keep things running through wedding season, we'll have enough revenue to refinance everything. By then she'll calm down. Once she's invested emotionally, she won't shut it down. I felt cold. Not angry, cold. Because that email proved something. This had never been about helping my parents. This had never been about temporary arrangements. They had planned this. From the beginning. They expected me to eventually discover it. They were just hoping it would be too late to stop. I kept reading. Then I found the final document, and suddenly everything else seemed small. It was an unsigned contract, a draft agreement. One paragraph was highlighted. Future ownership interest to be transferred upon marital restructuring. I read the sentence 3 times, then I understood. The wedding venue wasn't their end goal. The house was. They believed that eventually, through my marriage to Cole, they would gain control over the property. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. And once they controlled it, Harbor View Weddings would belong to them forever. I sat there staring at the page. The ocean outside the motel window sounded distant. For months, maybe longer, they'd been building toward this. Using my house, using my parents, using my trust. Then my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I opened it. The message contained only one sentence. You should know what they're saying about your parents. Attached was a photograph. I opened it, and my entire body went still. It was a screenshot from Harborview Weddings staff group chat. One message from Vivian read, "Please keep Daniel and Grace behind the cottage during events. Guests are paying for an upscale experience." Below it, another message appeared, one from Mason. "Just tell people they're caretakers." Caretakers, not homeowners, not family, not the reason the house existed. Caretakers. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I saved the screenshot because at that moment, I stopped thinking about what they had done to me and started thinking about what they had done to my parents. And that changed everything. The next morning, I called a lawyer. The next morning, I met with a real estate attorney named Rebecca Turner. I brought everything: the deed, the booking records, the emails, the screenshots. She spent nearly an hour reviewing it all before finally looking up. "The good news," she said, tapping the deed, "is that the property is entirely in your name." For the first time in days, I felt a little relief. Rebecca explained that the wedding business had been operating without my authorization and appeared to be missing several permits required for commercial events. More importantly, nobody in Cole's family had any legal ownership of the property. "What happens now?" I asked. Rebecca smiled slightly. "Now we make them stop." For the first time since arriving in Harbor Cove, I had a plan, and plans were something I understood. That afternoon I returned to the house. Preparations for another wedding were underway. Workers moved tables across the lawn, florists arranged flowers. Guests would begin arriving within hours. I found Vivian near the porch directing vendors. When she saw me, she immediately knew something had changed. "I spoke with an attorney," I said. Her expression tightened. "Ava, don't do anything dramatic. The venue is shutting down." The color drained from her face. "No." "Yes." She stared at me. "You can't do that." "I can." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said the one thing that proved she still didn't understand. "We worked hard building this." I looked around at the property. "My parents worked hard their entire lives too." Vivian looked away, because she knew I was right. Then her phone rang. She answered, listened, and suddenly all the confidence disappeared from her face. When the call ended, she looked terrified. At that exact moment, Mason came rushing out of the house. "Mom." Something was wrong, very wrong. I didn't know what had happened yet, but judging by the panic on both their faces, their problems had just become much bigger than me. Vivian stood frozen for several seconds after the call ended. The phone remained in her hand, but all the confidence was gone. I watched her carefully. "What happened?" She didn't answer. That alone told me everything. Then Mason came running out of the house, actually running. His face was pale. "Mom." Vivian turned toward him. Mason stopped when he saw me standing there. Then he lowered his voice. Too late. I had already heard enough. "The county is here." The county. Rebecca had warned me that once the complaints were reviewed, things could move quickly. Apparently they had. 2 vehicles rolled slowly into the driveway. Both carried county markings. The entire lawn went quiet. Workers stopped unloading equipment. Guests looked around nervously. Even the wedding planner seemed confused. 2 officials stepped out carrying folders. One of them approached Vivian. "Are you the operator of Harborview Weddings?" Nobody answered. The woman repeated the question. Finally, Mason said, "No." The official looked down at her paperwork. "Interesting." She flipped a page. "Because every document we received identifies you as the operator." Nobody spoke. The silence was painful. The official continued, "We are here regarding multiple permit violations and unauthorized commercial activity." A few guests exchanged worried looks. One vendor quietly began loading equipment back into his truck. Smart man. The official handed over several documents. Then she delivered the sentence that changed everything. "All commercial operations on this property are suspended immediately." The lawn exploded into chaos. Questions, arguments, phone calls, refund demands, angry vendors, confused guests. The wedding planner nearly burst into tears. And right in the middle of it all stood Vivian, speechless. Because for the first time, nobody could be manipulated. Nobody could be guilted. Nobody could be blamed. The paperwork didn't care about feelings. The paperwork only cared about facts. And the facts were not on her side. Within an hour, the wedding scheduled for that evening had been canceled. By sunset, half the vendors were gone. By morning, the rest had disappeared. Harborview Weddings had lasted less than 24 hours after the truth came out. The business was finished, completely. But one problem remained: coal. That conversation happened the next day. We stood alone on the bluff overlooking the ocean. The same view my parents loved, the same view that had started all of this. Cole looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in days. Maybe he hadn't. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I'm sorry." I believed him. That was the worst part. I believed he was sorry. But being sorry wasn't enough anymore. Not after everything. Not after my parents. Not after the lies. Not after the cottage. Not after standing by while his family treated my parents like unwanted guests. "You should be." He looked down. "I never thought it would get this far." I nodded. "I know." Because that was true. People like Cole never think things will get this far. They think they can borrow trust forever, until the bill arrives. He swallowed. "We can fix this." I looked at him, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. There's a difference. Anger wants a fight. Done wants a door. "You had months to fix it." His eyes filled with regret. "I love you." For a moment my heart hurt, because I had once loved him too. Maybe part of me still did. But love doesn't erase choices, and some choices change everything. "You let my parents live in a storage cottage." He looked away. "You watched it happen." More silence. Then I said the words I had already decided on days earlier. "We're finished, Cole." His shoulders dropped, almost as if he had known all along. Maybe he had. Neither of us cried. Neither of us yelled. Sometimes the end of something important is surprisingly quiet, like a door closing in another room. When I walked away, he didn't follow. That was the last conversation we ever had as husband and wife. 3 weeks later, my parents officially moved into the house, the real house, not the cottage, not the shed, the house. My mother claimed the kitchen immediately. Within 2 days, the entire downstairs smelled like lemon oil and homemade bread, exactly the way I remembered from childhood. My father rehung the brass wind chimes beside the porch. The first time the ocean wind caught them, he smiled. A real smile, the kind I hadn't seen in months. And for the first time since buying the property, everything felt right. One evening, a month later, I found my mother standing on the porch alone, looking at the water. The sunset painted the ocean gold. She didn't know I was watching. She simply closed her eyes and listened to the waves, exactly like she had when I was 11 years old, exactly like I'd imagined all those years. When she noticed me, she smiled. "Ava?" "Yeah, Mom?" She looked around the house, the porch, the water, the garden, everything. Then she said something I'll never forget. "It finally feels like home." 7 years of saving, months of planning, weeks of fighting, and somehow those 4 words made every second worth it. Sometimes people think a home is wood and walls and a deed. They're wrong. A home is knowing you belong there, and nobody gets to take that away. Not strangers, not family, not anyone. Because some gifts aren't measured by what they cost. They're measured by who you protect when someone tries to steal them. And that's exactly what I did. I protected my parents' dream. And in the process, I finally learned how to protect my own peace, too.